Trevor Whitmore laughed the moment he saw the woman in the beige coat step onto the polished marble floor of the dealership, never realizing that less than 24 hours later, the same woman would return surrounded by black SUVs, security escorts, and enough power to destroy his entire career without raising her voice once. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The showroom of Monarch European Motors looked more like a private museum than a car dealership. Crystal lights reflected across imported Italian marble, while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Rows of luxury vehicles sat under white spotlights like priceless sculptures worth more than most homes in America. Wealthy clients in tailored suits walked slowly between the cars while sales associates carried espresso trays and spoke in polished, rehearsed voices. Then the front glass doors opened quietly. Vivian Hale stepped inside alone. She wore simple brown boots, dark jeans, and an old beige coat that looked slightly wrinkled from the cold November wind outside. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, and there was nothing flashy about her appearance. No jewelry, no designer handbag, no bodyguards, just calm eyes and steady posture. Several people glanced at her for only a second before immediately looking away. Trevor Whitmore noticed her instantly. Senior sales consultant, top producer for 3 straight years. A man who judged customers before they even spoke. Standing beside a silver V12 coupe with a wealthy couple from Scottsdale, Trevor watched Vivian carefully with narrowed eyes. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, though his tone carried more suspicion than professionalism. Vivian gave a small, polite smile. "I'd like to test drive the Aurelia Spectre." The couple beside Trevor exchanged an amused look immediately. The Aurelia Spectre was the dealership's newest flagship model. Handcrafted in Germany. Nearly $400,000 after customization. Trevor let out a short laugh through his nose before folding his arms. "That vehicle requires a scheduled appointment," he replied. Vivian nodded once. "I understand. I called yesterday." Trevor tapped his tablet dramatically for several seconds, even though he already knew he was pretending. "I don't see your name anywhere." His eyes slowly moved over her coat again. "Besides, we usually reserve the Spectre for serious buyers." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Nearby employees pretended not to listen, but everyone heard it. Vivian remained completely calm. "I am a serious buyer." Trevor smiled again, this time wider. "Ma'am, this car isn't really the kind people test for fun on a Saturday afternoon." A few soft chuckles came from nearby guests. At the reception desk, Naomi Pierce looked down uncomfortably at her computer screen. Even she could feel the humiliation spreading across the showroom floor. But Vivian did not react. She simply turned her eyes toward the black Aurelia Spectre rotating slowly beneath the showroom lights. Her reflection moved silently across its polished surface. "It's a beautiful car," she said softly. Trevor stepped slightly in front of her path. Beautiful things usually belong to people who can afford them. The room fell strangely quiet. And for the first time since entering the dealership, Vivian slowly looked directly into Trevor Whitmore's eyes and asked one calm question that would haunt him by morning. "Do you always decide someone's value before learning their name?" Vivian Hale held Trevor Whitmore's stare without blinking, her calm expression almost unsettling against the polished tension spreading through the showroom. For a brief moment, even Trevor seemed caught off guard by the question. Then the corner of his mouth lifted again into the same cold smile. "No," he answered smoothly. "I decide based on experience." A few nearby customers chuckled softly, relieved that the salesman had recovered control of the moment. Trevor turned slightly toward the wealthy couple standing beside him, as though Vivian had already become an inconvenience no longer worth his full attention. "You would be surprised how many people walk in here just wanting photos beside expensive cars." Vivian remained perfectly still. "I am not here for photos." Her voice stayed gentle, almost quiet enough to disappear beneath the soft jazz music floating through the showroom. But somehow the silence around them made every word feel louder. Trevor glanced toward the reception desk. "Naomi, do we have any appointments under Hale?" Naomi Pierce quickly checked the system again, even though she already had minutes earlier. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "No, sir. Nothing scheduled." Trevor spread his hands slightly, as if the matter had now been officially settled. "There you have it." Vivian slipped one hand calmly into the pocket of her coat. "Then there must have been a mistake." "Usually there is," Trevor replied. "These vehicles are in very high demand." The wealthy man beside him smirked while admiring his reflection in the side mirror of the silver coupe. "Especially this week," he added casually. "Everybody suddenly thinks they can afford luxury." More quiet laughter followed. Naomi lowered her eyes again. The entire interaction was beginning to feel cruel in a way nobody wanted to openly acknowledge. Vivian slowly stepped closer to the black Aurelia Spectre, the overhead lights reflecting across her pale skin and blonde hair. Up close, the vehicle looked even more stunning. Deep obsidian paint, handcrafted chrome trim, cream leather visible through the tinted windows. Trevor noticed her studying the car too long and immediately shifted in front of her path again. "Please do not touch the vehicle." The sentence landed harder than he intended. Several conversations nearby stopped completely. Vivian looked at him with genuine surprise, though not anger. "I was only admiring it. And I am only protecting it," Trevor answered. The room grew awkwardly quiet. Naomi could practically feel people waiting to see whether Vivian would finally lose her composure. But she did not. She simply nodded once. Calm, controlled, dignified. That almost made the humiliation worse. Trevor checked his expensive silver watch dramatically. "Listen, ma'am, Saturdays are extremely busy for us. If you are interested in financing options for our pre-owned inventory, someone from another department can probably help you." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "You assume I need financing?" Trevor gave a polished corporate smile that no longer hid the arrogance underneath. "Most people do." A middle-aged woman standing near the espresso bar whispered something to her husband, and both of them smiled while watching Vivian from across the showroom. The marble floors echoed softly as another salesman walked by carrying paperwork for a customer purchasing a $200,000 convertible. The contrast in the room had become painfully obvious now. Wealth on one side, judgment on the other. Yet Vivian's eyes never wavered. "I asked for a test drive," she said quietly. Trevor exhaled through his nose and folded his arms tighter. "And I already explained our policy." Then his expression changed slightly, as if a new idea had just entered his mind. The smile returned slowly, sharper this time, more dangerous. He raised his voice just enough for nearby customers to hear clearly. "Actually," he said, "if you truly intend to purchase a $400,000 vehicle today, perhaps you would not mind showing proof of funds first." The showroom fell completely silent. The silence inside Monarch European Motors became almost painful after Trevor Whitmore demanded proof of funds. Even the soft jazz music in the ceiling suddenly felt too quiet against the tension spreading across the showroom floor. Customers near the espresso bar slowly turned their heads toward Vivian Hale, waiting for her reaction as though they were watching a live performance unfold in the middle of the dealership. Trevor stood perfectly confident beneath the white showroom lights, one hand resting against the black Aurelia Spectre while the polished chrome reflected across his tailored navy suit. He believed he had already won. Vivian looked at him calmly for several seconds before speaking. "You are asking for my bank information before allowing me to sit in the vehicle?" Trevor smiled without warmth. "I am asking for reassurance that we are not wasting company time." The wealthy couple beside him exchanged another amused glance. The man quietly muttered, "This is getting uncomfortable," though his grin suggested he was enjoying every second of it. Vivian reached slowly into the pocket of her coat, and several nearby employees immediately washed her hands with curiosity. Naomi Pierce stopped typing completely at the reception desk. For one brief second, Trevor's posture shifted as though he expected a dramatic response. Instead, Vivian removed a slim black leather card holder. It looked old, but carefully maintained. She opened it and pulled out a simple matte business card. No gold lettering, no decorative logo, just clean lettering pressed into thick white cardstock. Vivian extended it toward Trevor politely. "Perhaps this will help." Trevor barely glanced at the card before taking it. The second his eyes scanned the name, something subtle changed in his expression. Not fear, not recognition exactly, just confusion. His eyes narrowed briefly at the company name printed beneath Vivian Hale's signature. Hale Strategic Ventures. The reaction lasted less than 2 seconds before his arrogance returned. "Never heard of it," he said casually, handing the card back with obvious disinterest. But Naomi had seen his face change. She noticed the hesitation he tried to hide. Vivian placed the card holder back into her pocket without argument. "That is fine," she answered softly. Trevor chuckled lightly and looked toward the growing audience now pretending to browse nearby vehicles while openly listening. "Look, ma'am, people with real purchasing power usually arrive with assistants, appointments, or at minimum proper documentation." A salesman across the showroom laughed under his breath. Another customer whispered something that caused quiet amusement near the coffee station. Vivian stood alone in the center of the marble floor, while dozens of polished surfaces reflected the humiliation surrounding her from every direction. Yet somehow she still appeared calmer than anyone else in the room. Naomi finally gathered enough courage to step slightly forward from the reception desk. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "maybe we could simply schedule a private appointment later this week." Trevor did not even look at her. "Thank you, Naomi, but I can handle this." The sharpness in his voice immediately silenced her again. Vivian noticed the embarrassment crossing Naomi's face and offered her a small, reassuring smile. That only irritated Trevor more. He straightened his tie and raised his voice slightly higher now, making certain everyone nearby could hear him clearly. "Actually, there is a very simple way to settle this." The showroom quieted once more. Even the customers pretending not to stare were fully focused now. Trevor gestured dramatically toward the finance offices lining the far wall. "If you truly intend to purchase the Aurelius Spectre today, then let us run a financial verification right now in front of management." Naomi's face immediately tightened with concern. Vivian remained motionless. Trevor's smile widened slowly as he delivered the final blow loud enough for the entire showroom to hear. "Unless, of course, you walked in here knowing you could never afford the car in the first place." The humiliation hanging over the showroom became impossible to ignore after Trevor Whitmore's final remark echoed across the marble floor. Even the wealthy customers who had quietly enjoyed the spectacle moments earlier suddenly looked uncomfortable now that the cruelty had become completely public. Vivian Hale stood alone beneath the white showroom lights while reflections from the black Aurelius Spectre shimmered across her beige coat. Trevor remained perfectly composed, confident that everyone in the room stood on his side. "Well," he asked casually, "if this is truly the car you came to purchase, the finance office is right there." He pointed toward the glass offices along the far wall, where two managers had already started watching through partially open blinds. Vivian glanced briefly toward the offices before returning her calm eyes to Trevor. "I did not come here to prove my worth to strangers." Trevor gave a quiet laugh. "That is usually what people say when they cannot." The words landed heavily. Naomi Pierce felt her stomach tighten behind the reception desk. She could see several employees avoiding eye contact entirely now, embarrassed by what the situation had become yet too afraid to interrupt Trevor publicly. A middle-aged customer near the espresso bar shook his head slightly and muttered, "She should probably just leave." Vivian heard him. Everyone did. Yet her expression never changed. She simply looked once more at the Aurelius Spectre rotating slowly under the lights, as though she admired the engineering more than the status attached to it. "It is unfortunate," she said softly, "when luxury becomes confused with character." The sentence created a strange stillness across the room. Even Trevor paused for half a second before recovering with another polished smile. "Ma'am, Monarch European Motors prides itself on maintaining a certain experience for its clientele." Vivian nodded gently. "And what experience is that?" Trevor folded his hands in front of him. "An exclusive one." Naomi looked down immediately after hearing that word. Exclusive. Everyone understood what he truly meant. Vivian remained silent for several moments. The entire showroom waited. The ticking of a wall clock near the offices suddenly sounded louder than the music overhead. Finally, Vivian gave the smallest smile. Not bitter, not angry, almost sad. "You know," she said quietly, "the interesting thing about respect is that truly successful people rarely need to announce who deserves it." Trevor's jaw tightened slightly. The wealthy couple beside him exchanged uncertain glances now, no longer as entertained as before. Vivian slowly reached for the sleeve of her old beige coat and adjusted it neatly at the wrist. As she did, The fabric shifted just enough for Naomi to notice an elegant silver watch hidden beneath the cuff. Not flashy, not oversized, but unmistakably rare. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. She had seen one exactly like it only once before in a luxury magazine. The watch alone cost more than her yearly salary. Trevor either did not notice or chose to ignore it. "I think it would be best if we ended this conversation here," he said firmly. "You are beginning to disrupt the showroom atmosphere." Vivian gave a small nod. "If that is what you prefer." Trevor stepped aside and gestured toward the front entrance with the confidence of a man certain he had protected his territory. "Thank you for understanding." Nobody spoke. The marble floors echoed softly as Vivian turned toward the glass doors. Her boots moved calmly across the showroom, while dozens of eyes followed her in silence. Naomi looked as though she wanted to say something, but fear held her frozen behind the reception desk. Just before reaching the exit, Vivian paused briefly without turning around. "One day," she said gently, "you may realize that the people worth impressing are often the ones who never ask for attention." The room went completely silent. Then Vivian stepped outside into the cold November evening, the glass doors closing softly behind her while inside the showroom. Trevor Whitmore smiled proudly, completely unaware that his worst mistake had just walked out into the dark parking lot. Cold air swept across the dealership parking lot as Vivian Hale stepped onto the empty sidewalk outside Monarch European Motors. Behind the glass walls, the showroom still glowed with warm white light and polished luxury, but from outside it looked strangely distant now, almost hollow. Reflections moved behind the windows as customers resumed their conversations and salesmen returned to smiling performances for wealthy buyers. Vivian stood quietly beside the curb for several seconds, her hands resting calmly inside the pockets of her beige coat while the November wind brushed strands of blonde hair across her face. She did not look angry. She looked thoughtful. Across the street, traffic rolled steadily beneath the fading evening sky, while downtown skyscrapers reflected deep shades of orange and blue from the setting sun. Vivian slowly glanced down at the silver watch beneath her sleeve. The time made her smile faintly. Today would have been her father's 65th birthday. That was why she had come to the dealership in the first place. Not for attention, not for status. Years earlier, before his small auto repair shop failed, her father used to keep magazine photos of European luxury cars pinned across the garage walls. He had loved beautiful engineering the way artists loved paintings. Vivian could still remember sitting on an old wooden stool as a little girl while her father explained every detail of an engine with grease on his hands and hope in his voice. "A car tells you everything about the people who build it," he used to say, "especially how they treat ordinary folks." After he passed away, Vivian built her company slowly, quietly, without interviews or magazine covers. She avoided publicity whenever possible. Most people in the business world had never even seen her photograph. But every year on her father's birthday, she allowed herself one tradition. She visited a showroom somewhere in America just to sit inside a beautiful car for a few minutes and remember the dreams they once shared in that tiny garage. That was all she had wanted tonight. The sound of the dealership doors opening interrupted her thoughts. Vivian turned gently as Naomi Pierce hurried outside, carrying a folded dark scarf in her hands. "Ma'am," Naomi called softly, slightly out of breath. "You left this near the reception desk." Vivian accepted the scarf with surprise. "Thank you." Naomi hesitated awkwardly beneath the cold evening lights. Up close, the young receptionist looked genuinely upset. "I am really sorry about what happened in there," she admitted quietly. "Mr. Whitmore can be." She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. Vivian gave her a reassuring smile. "You do not need to apologize for someone else's character." Naomi looked down at the pavement. Still, it was wrong. Vivian studied her kindly for a moment. "The fact that you recognize that already places you ahead of many people." Naomi's eyes lifted slightly. There was no bitterness in Vivian's voice. No resentment. Somehow that made the kindness feel even heavier. "Most people change once money enters the room," Vivian continued softly. "Do not let that happen to you." Naomi nodded slowly, visibly emotional now. Inside the showroom behind them, Trevor Whitmore laughed loudly with another customer, completely unaware his voice carried faintly through the glass doors into the cold evening air. Vivian simply turned away from the sound. Then something changed. At first it was subtle. a distant vibration beneath the pavement. Naomi frowned slightly and looked toward the far end of the street. Moments later, low engine sounds rolled through downtown like approaching thunder. Black headlights appeared around the corner one after another in perfect formation. Large luxury SUVs moved slowly toward the dealership with dark, tinted windows reflecting the city lights. Naomi's expression shifted instantly from confusion to disbelief as the motorcade approached the curb directly in front of Monarch European Motors. The line of black SUVs rolled to a smooth stop along the curb outside Monarch European Motors with quiet precision, their headlights washing pale reflections across the glass walls of the showroom. Naomi Pierce stared speechlessly beside Vivian Hale as suited drivers stepped out almost simultaneously from each vehicle. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic shouting, only controlled movement and a level of discipline that instantly changed the atmosphere around the building. The city traffic nearby suddenly felt distant. One of the drivers, a tall man with silver hair and dark gloves, approached Vivian respectfully and opened the rear passenger door of the lead SUV. "Good evening, Ms. Hale," he said calmly. "We were delayed leaving the airport." Naomi's eyes widened immediately. Trevor Whitmore happened to glance outside through the showroom windows at that exact moment while laughing with another customer. The smile disappeared from his face almost instantly. Several employees near the entrance noticed the motorcade too, and conversation throughout the showroom began fading one voice at a time. Vivian gave the driver a polite nod. "Thank you, Miles." The man lowered his voice slightly. "Ms. Voss is already inside waiting for your call." Naomi looked from the driver back to Vivian, visibly stunned now. "Ms. Voss?" she repeated softly before she could stop herself. Vivian offered only a small smile. Through the glass walls, Trevor slowly stepped away from his customer and moved closer to the entrance, confusion spreading across his face. The wealthy couple from earlier turned toward the windows as well, their expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty. Then the rear door of the second SUV opened. An elegant older woman stepped out wearing a charcoal coat and black leather gloves. Eleanor Voss, chairwoman of Voss International Automotive Group. Her face appeared regularly on financial magazines across America. Even people outside the auto industry recognized her immediately. The moment Trevor saw her, all color drained from his face. Inside the showroom, employees straightened instinctively while whispers spread rapidly across the marble floor. "That is Eleanor Voss. Why is she here? Is there an event tonight?" Naomi looked back at Vivian with disbelief slowly settling into understanding. Eleanor Voss walked directly toward Vivian without hesitation. The powerful businesswoman's expression softened warmly the moment she reached her. "There you are," Eleanor said. "I was beginning to think you had changed your mind about tomorrow's acquisition meeting." Trevor froze completely near the glass doors. Vivian answered calmly. "I considered it for a moment." Eleanor noticed the subtle tension immediately. Her eyes moved toward the dealership interior where employees stood awkwardly pretending not to stare. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly. Before Vivian could answer, the showroom doors opened quickly and Graham Sutton hurried outside, visibly panicked after finally recognizing who had arrived. "Ms. Voss," he said breathlessly. "We had no idea you were coming tonight." Eleanor barely acknowledged him. Her attention remained on Vivian. "You did not tell them?" Vivian glanced once through the glass toward Trevor Whitmore, who now looked physically unable to move. "No," she answered softly. "I wanted to see how they treated someone they believed had nothing." The silence that followed felt heavier than the cold evening air. Graham's expression collapsed instantly as realization struck him all at once. Inside the showroom, Trevor slowly remembered the white business card he had mocked less than an hour earlier. Hale Strategic Ventures, the investment firm currently negotiating to acquire a controlling share in Monarch European Motors nationwide. His breathing became shallow. Eleanor Voss finally turned toward the dealership entrance, her eyes sharp now. "Interesting," she said coldly. Vivian adjusted the sleeve of her beige coat and looked calmly at Trevor through the glass doors while the entire showroom watched in stunned silence. Then, with a voice so quiet it somehow became impossible to ignore, she said, "Now they may introduce themselves properly." The atmosphere inside Monarch European Motors changed completely the moment Vivian Hale stepped back through the glass doors beside Eleanor Voss. Less than an hour earlier, Customers had laughed quietly, while Trevor Whitmore questioned whether she could afford to touch a car in the showroom. Now the same people moved aside instinctively as she walked across the marble floor with calm confidence, followed by executives, drivers, and legal advisors in dark coats. Nobody laughed anymore. The room had become so quiet that even the soft clicking of dress shoes against marble echoed sharply through the dealership. Trevor stood frozen near the black Aurelia Spectre, his face pale beneath the showroom lights. Graham Sutton approached Vivian carefully, almost nervously. "Ms. Hale," he said quietly, "please allow me to apologize personally for tonight." Vivian looked at him without anger. An apology matters most when it changes behavior. Graham lowered his eyes immediately. Nearby employees exchanged uneasy glances, while several customers slowly pretended to return to browsing vehicles they were no longer interested in. Eleanor Voss removed her gloves calmly and turned toward Trevor. "You asked Ms. Hale for proof of funds?" Trevor swallowed hard before answering. "I did not realize who she was." The sentence hung heavily in the air. Vivian's expression did not change at all. "That," she said softly, "was exactly the problem." Naomi Pierce stepped forward hesitantly from the reception desk, clearly trembling under the attention now focused on the center of the showroom. "Ms. Hale," she said carefully, "I should have spoken sooner." Vivian immediately gave her a reassuring look. "You showed kindness when it mattered. That is enough." Naomi's eyes filled slightly with emotion. Trevor stared at Vivian in disbelief, unable to understand why someone with that level of power remained so calm. Most executives he had encountered enjoyed public humiliation when they held the advantage. But Vivian did not seem interested in revenge. Eleanor Voss glanced around the showroom slowly before speaking to the entire staff. "For those who may not know," she announced, "Hale Strategic Ventures currently funds over 40% of our electric expansion program nationwide." Quiet gasps spread across the room instantly. Trevor's knees nearly weakened beneath him. Eleanor continued. 3 struggling dealerships in this state remained open last year because Ms. Hale personally refused to approve layoffs during restructuring. Several employees exchanged shocked looks. One older salesman whispered softly, "She saved those stores?" Vivian looked uncomfortable hearing the attention placed on her. "Families depended on those jobs," she answered simply. Graham stared at her speechlessly. The realization spreading through the dealership now felt almost unbearable. The quiet woman they had treated like an inconvenience was the very person responsible for protecting hundreds of employees throughout the company. Trevor's voice finally returned, though barely. "Ms. Hale, I never meant." Vivian raised one hand gently, stopping him without hostility. "You meant exactly what you said." The silence afterward felt enormous. No one moved. No one spoke. Vivian slowly looked around the showroom at the polished vehicles, the marble floors, the expensive lighting, and the employees standing stiffly under the weight of shame. "My father repaired cars in a one-bay garage for 30 years, she said quietly. "He taught me that the true measure of luxury is not the leather seats or the engine. It is whether people without status are still treated with dignity when they walk through the door." Naomi lowered her head, visibly emotional now. Even several customers appeared ashamed for having watched the humiliation earlier without intervening. Trevor stood completely broken by the realization that the woman he mocked had quietly carried more influence, wealth, and humanity than anyone else in the building. Vivian turned toward Naomi once more. "Do not lose your kindness trying to survive places like this," she said softly. Then she faced Trevor again. There was no anger in her eyes now, only disappointment. Somehow that felt worse. The showroom remained perfectly still as Vivian adjusted the sleeve of her coat and glanced once more at the black Aurelia Spectre under the lights. And for the first time that entire evening, everyone inside Monarch European Motors no longer saw a woman in an old beige coat. They saw someone far beyond their reach. No one inside Monarch European Motors moved for several long seconds after Vivian Hale finished speaking. The showroom that had once felt loud with confidence and quiet mockery now stood wrapped in uncomfortable silence beneath the white ceiling lights. Trevor Whitmore remained beside the black Aurelia Spectre with his hands stiff at his sides, unable to escape the weight of every word he had spoken earlier that evening. Around him, customers who once smirked at Vivian now avoided eye contact entirely. Even the wealthy couple who had laughed beside Trevor slowly drifted toward the far end of the showroom. embarrassed to remain near the center of the humiliation. Eleanor Voss finally turned toward Graham Sutton. "I believe we have seen enough." Graham immediately straightened his posture. "Yes, ma'am." Trevor swallowed hard as Graham approached him carefully. The senior salesman who once carried himself like the most important man in the building now looked smaller somehow, diminished beneath the polished lights and silent stares surrounding him. "Trevor," Graham said quietly, "please step into my office." Trevor looked briefly toward Vivian as if hoping she might intervene. She did not, but neither did she look satisfied. That was the part he understood the least. Vivian simply stood calmly beside Naomi Pierce, her beige coat still playing against the expensive suits surrounding her. There was no triumph in her expression, only disappointment. Graham lowered his voice further. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full review of your conduct." Trevor closed his eyes briefly. A few employees shifted uncomfortably nearby, but nobody argued. Deep down, every person in the room knew the decision was justified long before they heard it spoken aloud. Trevor nodded once, unable to form a proper response. As he turned toward the offices, Vivian finally spoke. "Mr. Sutton." Graham stopped immediately. "Yes, Ms. Hale." Vivian glanced calmly toward Trevor before answering. "Do not destroy his life over one evening." Trevor froze mid-step. The room became quiet again. Even Eleanor Voss looked slightly surprised. Vivian continued softly. "What happened tonight should become a lesson for this company, not simply a punishment for one employee." Graham nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Vivian looked around the showroom once more, her eyes moving across the employees standing silently near the reception desk. "A culture like this does not appear overnight," she said. "People learn it by watching what behavior gets rewarded." Naomi lowered her eyes thoughtfully. Several sales associates shifted uneasily, recognizing themselves in the truth of her words. Eleanor Voss folded her gloves carefully. "What would you suggest?" Vivian answered without hesitation. "Mandatory hospitality retraining across every Monarch location under acquisition review. Anonymous customer evaluations. And promotion opportunities based not only on sales numbers, but client treatment." Graham immediately nodded again. "We can begin implementing that this week." Then Vivian turned gently toward Naomi. "And I believe your receptionist deserves consideration for a larger role." Naomi looked stunned. "Me?" Vivian smiled faintly. "Kindness under pressure is rare in business." Naomi's eyes filled with emotion as several employees around her exchanged respectful glances for the first time all evening. The atmosphere inside the showroom had completely transformed now. Earlier, people saw Vivian as someone who did not belong. Now every eye followed her with genuine admiration, not because of her wealth, because of the grace she carried while holding more power than anyone realized. Trevor slowly stopped near the office hallway and looked back toward Vivian one final time. The shame in his face no longer came from losing status. It came from finally understanding what she had tried to teach him hours earlier on the showroom floor. All evening he had judged value by appearance, clothing, and status symbols. Yet the most powerful person in the building had arrived wearing an old beige coat and speaking with kindness to everyone around her. Trevor lowered his head quietly as the realization settled deeper than any punishment could. And standing beneath the reflection of the showroom lights, he finally understood that the people who truly possess power rarely feel the need to prove it. 3 months later, Monarch European Motors no longer felt like the same dealership. The marble floors still gleamed beneath elegant showroom lights, and the luxury vehicles still rotated slowly beneath polished chrome displays. But the atmosphere had changed in ways every employee could feel. Customers were greeted warmly the moment they entered, regardless of clothing, age, or appearance. New training programs had been implemented across every Monarch location under Hale's strategic ventures. Sales associates were now evaluated not only by revenue, but by respect, patience, and customer care. Quietly, without public announcements or press conferences, Vivian Hale had reshaped the culture of an entire company. Naomi Pierce stood behind the newly redesigned welcome desk, wearing a Navy management blazer with her name engraved beneath the title Guest Relations Director. She still looked slightly surprised every morning she walked through the showroom doors. Yet every employee respected her because they remembered exactly why she had earned the position. Some lessons could not be taught through policy manuals. They had to be lived. Late one evening, after the showroom closed and the city lights shimmered through the tall glass windows, a familiar black SUV rolled quietly into the parking lot. Naomi looked up from her desk and smiled immediately as Vivian stepped inside, wearing the same beige coat from months earlier. Several employees greeted her warmly now, not out of fear or obligation, but genuine admiration. Vivian returned every greeting with the same calm kindness she had shown before anyone knew her name. "You came back," Naomi said happily as she approached her. Vivian smiled softly. "I promised myself I would." Naomi glanced toward the center of the showroom, where the black Aurelia Spectre still sat beneath the white lights. "It is waiting for you." Vivian's eyes rested on the vehicle for several quiet moments. Tonight the dealership felt peaceful instead of tense. No whispers. No judgment. No cold stares measuring whether someone belonged. Just quiet respect. As Vivian slowly approached the car, another figure stepped forward from near the office hallway. Trevor Whitmore. He no longer wore expensive tailored suits or carried the same arrogant posture. His suspension had become a permanent demotion to administrative support while he completed retraining under company review. The confidence that once filled every word he spoke had been replaced by humility. Trevor stopped several feet away from Vivian, visibly nervous. For a moment he struggled to find the right words. Then he finally spoke quietly. "Ms. Hale, I owe you a real apology." The showroom remained still. Naomi watched silently nearby. Trevor lowered his eyes. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I embarrassed you publicly, and I became exactly the kind of person this company should never represent." Vivian listened calmly without interrupting. Trevor took a slow breath. "You could have ruined my career completely that night. Instead, you gave me the chance to understand what I did wrong." Vivian looked at him for several seconds before answering softly. "People rarely change when they are humiliated. They change when they are forced to see themselves clearly." Trevor nodded once, accepting the truth without excuse. For the first time since that night, there was no defensiveness left in him, only honesty. Vivian then turned toward the Aurelia Spectre. Naomi smiled and handed her the keys personally. "I believe this test drive is long overdue." A quiet laugh spread gently through the showroom. Vivian slid into the driver's seat slowly, running her hand across the cream leather interior while memories of her father's tiny garage drifted softly through her mind. For one peaceful moment, she was no longer a powerful investor or business leader. She was simply a daughter honoring a promise made long ago beside a worn wooden workbench and oil-stained floors. The engine started with a smooth, elegant hum that filled the showroom like music. Trevor stepped aside respectfully as the car rolled slowly toward the exit beneath the city lights outside. And that night, everyone inside Monarch European Motors finally understood that dignity does not announce itself through wealth, titles, or appearances. It reveals itself quietly through the way we choose to treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us.